Most men think single motherhood begins with bad luck, wrong man, wrong timing, wrong relationship. But if you look closely at the patterns modern women repeat over and over again, you start realizing something uncomfortable. Many of these situations were predictable long before the child ever arrived. And no, this is not about hating women. It's about understanding how repeated emotional habits can reshape a woman's ability to bond, commit, and build something stable over time. A woman can say she wants peace, loyalty, and family. But if her entire dating history was built on chasing excitement, chaos, validation, and emotional highs, eventually her mind may stop recognizing stability as attractive. That's when the cycle begins. First comes emotional addiction, then unstable relationships, then motherhood without commitment. And today, I'm going to show you the 5 psychological connections that explain why this pattern keeps happening, why high-value men quietly avoid it, and why so many good men walk into these situations blindly believing love alone will save them. If you've ever watched a woman reject stability, chase chaos, then blame the outcome later, comment, "I've seen this pattern," below. Because once you understand the psychology behind this, you stop dating emotionally and start choosing wisely. Before we go deeper, you need to understand something most people are too emotionally dishonest to admit. Patterns matter more than promises. Always. And one of the biggest mistakes men make is believing a woman's words about what she wants, instead of studying the relationship patterns she keeps repeating. A woman can sincerely say she wants marriage, loyalty, and a peaceful family life. I'm sure many of them truly believe that. But desire means nothing if her behavior has been training her for the exact opposite outcome for years. Because every relationship teaches people something. Every breakup shapes emotional habits. Every cycle conditions expectations. And this is where many men get trapped. They meet a woman with a long history of short relationships, unstable attachments, emotional drama, constant partner changes, and unresolved emotional baggage. But instead of seeing it as a pattern, they romanticize it. They tell themselves, "She just hasn't met the right man yet." Meanwhile, the evidence is sitting directly in front of them. You have to stop looking at isolated moments and start looking at repeated behavior over time. Because repeated behavior reveals emotional wiring. A woman who constantly leaves relationships the moment feelings fade slowly conditions herself to disconnect instead of repair. She becomes emotionally trained to restart instead of rebuild. And after enough repetitions, instability stops feeling abnormal. It becomes familiar, comfortable even. That's why some women can move from one relationship to another so quickly without ever truly processing the emotional damage underneath. They're no longer bonding deeply. They're chasing stimulation. And that leads us into the first psychological connection most men completely overlook. What repeated bonding and breaking can do to a person's ability to attach emotionally over the long term. Let's start with something uncomfortable but real. Human beings were not designed to endlessly bond, detach, bond again, detach again, and walk away unchanged every single time. Especially emotionally. Every time intimacy happens, the brain releases chemicals connected to attachment, trust, and emotional bonding. That's not ideology. That's biology. Real intimacy is supposed to create emotional glue between two people so they can survive difficult seasons together instead of constantly searching for someone new the moment things feel uncomfortable. But repeated emotional cycling can change people over time. This does not happen to every woman, of course. Self-awareness, emotional maturity, and long-term stability can absolutely interrupt these patterns. But when there is no reflection, no healing, and no real change, the pattern often deepens. Imagine bending the same piece of metal back and forth over and over again. Eventually it weakens. Not instantly, gradually, quietly. That's what can happen emotionally when someone repeatedly enters intense relationships, breaks them, then immediately chases another emotional high. And many women describe this damage without realizing what they're actually describing. They say things like, "I don't feel deeply connected anymore," or "something feels missing with good men," or "I get bored when things become stable." What they don't realize is that emotional instability may have slowly rewired what their nervous system responds to. Now here's where good men get blindsided. A stable man enters her life. He's emotionally available, consistent, reliable. He communicates clearly. He actually has the qualities needed to build a family. But instead of feeling safe and attracted, she feels underwhelmed. Why? Because calmness cannot compete with the emotional intensity her brain became accustomed to for years. And this is the tragedy many men misunderstand. They think being a better man automatically guarantees deeper attachment from a woman. It doesn't. Not if her emotional system has already been conditioned to associate attraction with instability, unpredictability, and emotional tension. A woman can genuinely appreciate a good man while still being unable to emotionally bond with him in a healthy way. That contradiction destroys more relationships than most people realize, because eventually, the relationship begins running on logic alone. The emotional glue is weak, the attachment feels temporary, and when real pressure enters the relationship later, there's very little holding everything together underneath the surface. But the deeper problem is this. After enough emotional cycles, many women stop chasing love entirely. What they're actually chasing is the emotional high itself. This is where many men completely misunderstand female psychology. They think a woman leaves because she stopped loving the man. Sometimes that's true. But many times, what she actually misses is the emotional intensity she felt at the beginning. The butterflies, the uncertainty, the obsession, the dopamine rush of somebody new. And if a woman repeats that cycle enough times, her brain slowly starts confusing emotional chaos with genuine connection. That's when peaceful relationships begin feeling emotionally empty to her. You've probably seen this happen before. A woman finally gets the kind of man she claimed she always wanted. He's stable, loyal, emotionally mature. No games, no disappearing acts, no manipulation. For a few months, she says she feels safe with him. Then suddenly, she starts saying something feels off. She can't explain it clearly. She just doesn't feel the spark anymore. No, the spark didn't disappear. The emotional roller coaster disappeared. And for someone addicted to emotional highs, calmness can feel almost uncomfortable. Predictability feels boring. Stability feels emotionally flat. So without realizing it, she starts creating problems just to feel intensity again. Arguments, distance, emotional testing, pulling away, talking to other men for validation, anything to recreate stimulation. Here's the brutal truth most men never hear. Some women are not addicted to love. They're addicted to emotional movement. If things become too peaceful, they mistake peace for emotional death. That's why so many stable men end up confused in relationships like this. They did everything right, yet somehow they still lost her attention, because they were trying to build security while her nervous system was still chasing excitement. And once attraction becomes tied to instability, the next problem becomes almost inevitable. The men who create the strongest chemistry are often the exact men least capable of building stable fatherhood later. Now, we arrive at the second connection, and this is where a lot of men finally start recognizing the pattern clearly. Because attraction is not random. Over time, people condition themselves to respond to certain emotional experiences, and many women accidentally train themselves to feel attracted to the exact type of man most dangerous for long-term stability. The emotionally unavailable man, the unpredictable man. The man who gives attention inconsistently. The man who creates anxiety, uncertainty, emotional tension, and intense chemistry. Why? Because unstable emotions create stronger short-term highs. A calm, emotionally healthy man usually doesn't trigger that same nervous system reaction. He feels steady, predictable, safe. But to a woman conditioned by years of emotional highs, safe can feel boring. And this is where good men lose without understanding why. You'll see a woman reject the loyal man who genuinely wants to build with her, then run back toward the man who barely texts consistently, disappears emotionally, and keeps her anxious all the time. From the outside, it looks irrational. But psychologically, her brain has already associated emotional intensity with attraction. Many women don't chase good men. They chase stimulation. That doesn't mean they consciously want pain. Most don't. But they become emotionally calibrated to instability without realizing it. So when pregnancy eventually happens, it often happens with the exact type of man least prepared for fatherhood. The exciting man, the impulsive man, the emotionally immature man, the man who was always perfect for short-term chemistry and terrible for long-term responsibility. And once real life enters the picture, reality hits hard, because chemistry can create children very easily. But chemistry alone cannot raise them. That's the part modern dating culture keeps lying about. Attraction and compatibility are not the same thing. A man who creates emotional obsession is not automatically a man capable of building a stable family. And deep down, many women realize this too late. After years of rejecting stability because it didn't feel exciting enough, they suddenly find themselves emotionally exhausted, pregnant, abandoned, or trapped in another collapsing relationship, wondering why the same story keeps repeating. But the next layer goes even deeper than partner choice. Because after enough temporary relationships, many women no longer even understand what real long-term love is supposed to feel like anymore. One of the most dangerous things modern dating culture has done to women is convince them that love is supposed to feel intense all the time. Constant excitement, constant passion, constant emotional fireworks. And if those feelings fade, people assume the relationship itself must be wrong. But real love does not feel like the honeymoon phase forever. It can't. The beginning of a relationship is chemically intense by nature. Everything is new. Every message feels exciting. Every touch feels amplified. The brain is overloaded with novelty and anticipation. But mature relationships eventually transition into something quieter, more stable, less dramatic. And that's actually healthy. The problem is that many women never stay long enough to experience that stage properly. The moment emotional intensity drops, they panic. They assume the connection is dying. So instead of building deeper attachment through routine, teamwork, trust, and emotional consistency, they leave and restart the cycle with someone new. That creates a psychological addiction to beginnings. And once that addiction forms, stable love starts feeling emotionally wrong, especially after children enter the picture. Because after a baby arrives, reality changes fast. Sleep disappears, stress increases, romance naturally decreases for a period of time. The relationship becomes less about excitement and more about responsibility, patience, sacrifice, and emotional endurance. But if a woman spent years believing love should always feel thrilling, she interprets this transition as proof she chose the wrong man. This is where relationships quietly begin collapsing. She starts saying things like, "We lost our connection," when what really disappeared was novelty. She mistakes emotional calmness for emotional emptiness. And instead of recognizing this as a normal stage of long-term bonding, she starts chasing intensity somewhere else again. That's why some women sabotage perfectly stable relationships without fully understanding why they're unhappy. They are unconsciously searching for the emotional high they trained themselves to depend on. Real love becomes quieter over time. Mature people understand that. Emotionally impulsive people don't. And when life becomes truly difficult, that emotional immaturity gets exposed in ways that permanently damage families. This is the part nobody romanticizes online. Raising children is hard. Not aesthetically hard, Not cute social media stress, hard. I mean genuinely exhausting in ways that expose every weakness inside a relationship. Sleep deprivation changes people. Financial pressure changes people. Hormonal stress changes people. Suddenly there's less intimacy, less freedom, less attention, less excitement, and far more responsibility than before. Even strong couples struggle during this phase. Some couples absolutely grow stronger through hardship, but people who never developed emotional endurance often struggle the most when life becomes heavy. Now think about what happens when someone enters this stage without ever developing real emotional endurance. If a woman spent years escaping relationships the moment they became difficult, boring, or emotionally unsatisfying, motherhood does not magically erase that pattern. In most cases, pressure intensifies it. That's why some relationships begin falling apart almost immediately after a child arrives. She becomes emotionally overwhelmed. Arguments increase. Small frustrations become constant conflict. She starts emotionally withdrawing from her partner, while secretly fantasizing about escape, validation, attention from other men, or a completely different life altogether. And many men never see it coming because they confuse emotional intensity with emotional stability. Those are not the same thing. A woman can feel obsessed with you emotionally and still lack the maturity needed to stay committed once real hardship begins. In fact, some of the most emotionally intense women become the least stable under pressure because their attachment was always based on feelings, not discipline. That's the truth many men learn too late. People who always leave when life gets hard rarely become loyal simply because a child is involved. A baby does not create emotional maturity. A family does not automatically heal instability. Pressure reveals what was already there. And this is why so many men end up shocked after investing years into relationships they thought were solid. The warning signs were visible from the beginning. The emotional inconsistency, the unstable dating history, the constant need for stimulation, the inability to tolerate peace. Those patterns eventually surface under pressure. And once the relationship collapses, an even darker cycle begins. Because single motherhood itself creates conditions that make repeating the pattern far more likely. Once a woman becomes a single mother, the situation usually becomes far more complicated than most men realize. Because now she's no longer operating from stability, she's operating from survival mode. And survival mode changes people psychologically. Suddenly, her time is limited. Her emotional energy is drained. Financial pressure increases. Stress becomes constant. And instead of slowing down to heal the emotional patterns that created the situation, many women become even more emotionally reactive because life itself becomes overwhelming. This is where the cycle starts feeding itself. The unstable relationship history weakened her ability to bond deeply. That led her toward emotionally exciting but unstable men. Then commitment collapsed under pressure. Now she's alone raising a child while emotionally exhausted and financially vulnerable. And instead of truly confronting those patterns, she often searches for another relationship, hoping a new man will finally change the outcome. But a new man cannot fix an old mindset. That's the part many people avoid saying honestly. If the emotional habits remain the same outcomes usually repeat. Maybe the faces change. Maybe the promises change. But the underlying psychology stays identical. The attraction to instability, the emotional impulsiveness, the inability to sustain peace without becoming restless inside it. And children absorb this instability more than people realize. They grow up watching emotional inconsistency become normal, watching conflict become normal, watching relationships constantly break apart and restart. Broken patterns don't disappear. They become the emotional environment children grow up inside. That's why these cycles often continue across generations. And here's the painful irony. Many women genuinely believe each new relationship will finally be different because they focus on the man changing instead of examining the emotional patterns inside themselves. They think, this man is different. But if the decision-making process stays emotionally impulsive, eventually the same consequences return. This is why high-value men pay attention to patterns, not temporary emotions. A smart man understands that repeated instability is rarely accidental. It usually reflects deeper emotional conditioning that takes years of self-awareness and serious internal work to change. And once men truly understand this cycle, they begin seeing something else very clearly. There's a reason successful, emotionally disciplined men rarely commit seriously to women with these patterns. Not because they hate them, because they understand risk. This is the conversation most people avoid because it sounds harsh. But intelligent men quietly understand it anyway. Men who have built something valuable in life become extremely careful about who they build a future with. Not because they're cold, not because they're insecure, because they understand how expensive emotional mistakes become once children, marriage, finances, and legal systems enter the picture. A high-value man does not only ask himself, "Am I attracted to her?" He asks something far more important. What patterns does this woman bring into my future? And when he sees a long history of unstable relationships, emotional chaos, multiple short-term partners, unresolved baggage, or children from previous unstable relationships, he sees risk, not guaranteed disaster. Risk. That distinction matters. A smart man understands that attraction alone is not enough to build a peaceful life. Chemistry can blind people temporarily, but patterns eventually expose reality. That's why many successful men privately separate women into two categories. Women they feel attraction toward, and women they genuinely trust enough for long-term commitment. Not every man thinks this way, but experienced men who've seen enough relational chaos often become far more selective about commitment. Because deep down, they understand something women often underestimate. Men bond emotionally through trust and emotional safety far more than people admit. If a woman's history suggests instability, impulsiveness, disloyalty, or emotional unpredictability, many men simply cannot fully relax with her psychologically, even if the attraction is strong. That's why some women experience the same frustrating pattern over and over. Men desire them physically. Men spend time with them casually. Men enjoy the connection. But commitment never fully arrives. The future conversations never happen. Family integration never happens. Long-term investment never happens. The man enjoys the experience while quietly protecting his future at the same time. And here's what men should actually pay attention to instead. Look at whether a woman can maintain stable relationships over long periods of time. Look at her emotional discipline. Look at her friendships, her family dynamics, her ability to stay peaceful without constant validation and emotional stimulation. Look at whether she chooses stable men consistently or keeps returning to emotional chaos repeatedly. Because the strongest predictor of future relationship behavior is repeated past relationship behavior. Choosing the mother of your children is not just romance. It is one of the biggest strategic decisions of your entire life. At the end of the day, this conversation is not about shaming women. It's about understanding consequences before you attach your future to them blindly. Because too many men walk into relationships believing love alone can overcome emotional instability, damaged attachment patterns, poor decision-making, and years of repeated relational chaos. Usually, it can't. A good man cannot heal someone who refuses to confront their own patterns honestly. And one of the most dangerous lies modern society tells men is that your standards are somehow cruel. They're not. Standards are protection. Especially when children, marriage, finances, and decades of your future are involved. The woman you choose will shape your emotional peace more than almost any other decision you make in life. The wrong woman can drain your energy, destroy your stability, separate you from your children, and leave emotional scars that follow you for years. But the right woman does the opposite. She multiplies your peace, your discipline, your purpose, your strength. That's why intelligent men pay attention to patterns instead of getting hypnotized by chemistry alone. And listen carefully to me when I say this. A woman's beauty can attract you temporarily. Her emotions can intoxicate you temporarily, but her patterns will eventually determine the quality of your entire life. So choose slowly, choose consciously, choose based on evidence, not fantasy. If this video helped you see modern relationships more clearly, subscribe and stay close to this channel. Every week, we expose the psychological patterns most men notice too late. And I want you to comment honestly below. Would you ever ignore a woman's past when choosing the future mother of your children? Yes or no? Because protecting your future is not insecurity. Sometimes it's wisdom.